In the summer of 1939, a self-taught excavator working in a field in Suffolk, England, pushed his trowel into what he expected to be an empty mound and felt the curve of a wooden plank beneath the soil. It wasn't a plank. It was the rivet-studded timber of a ship, an entire ocean-going vessel buried inland, over 1,000 years before anyone thought to look for it there. That moment contradicted everything scholars thought they knew about early medieval England. The period between the fall of Roman Britain and the Norman conquest had long been called the Dark Ages, not because people believed nothing happened, but because the documentary record was so thin that historians couldn't see clearly into it. Sutton Hoo didn't just fill a gap. It rewrote the terms of the debate entirely. The site sits near Woodbridge in Suffolk, in the east of England, territory that once belonged to a kingdom called East Anglia. 2 Anglo-Saxon cemeteries are preserved there, dating from the 6th to the 7th centuries. For generations, the mounds on the property were known to the local landowner, Edith Pretty, but what lay inside them was anyone's guess. Pretty had enough curiosity and enough resources to find out. She hired a local excavator named Basil Brown to investigate whether the mounds held anything of significance. Brown was not a university-trained academic. He was self-taught, employed by a provincial museum, and had spent more than 30 years doing the careful, methodical work of excavation in relative obscurity. The decision to bring him in rather than a credentialed academic would later become its own small controversy. But in the summer of 1938, Brown began working through the mounds on Pretty's estate. He had already examined 3 smaller mounds before he turned his attention to the largest. Mound 1 had been disturbed by earlier treasure hunters at some point in its history, but only at the top. The burial chamber below remained intact. When Brown and his small crew began removing soil in 1939, they encountered iron rivets arranged in a pattern that could only mean one thing: the outline of a ship. The vessel was roughly 27 meters long, large enough to have crossed the North Sea. It had been hauled inland and buried in a trench, with a timber burial chamber constructed amidships. The wood of both ship and chamber had decayed completely in the acidic Suffolk soil. What remained was the ghost of the structure, the shape pressed into the earth, the rivets holding their original positions, and the contents of the chamber preserved where they had been placed, more than 13 centuries earlier. What came out of that chamber forced scholars to reconsider what power, craft, and connectivity looked like in early medieval England. The grave goods were extraordinary in both quantity and quality. There was silver plate from Byzantium, a ceremonial standard, a whetstone of a type that may have carried symbolic rather than practical significance, a lyre, drinking vessels, and weaponry. And at the center of it all, a helmet, iron-framed, faced with decorated panels, fitted with a mask that covered the wearer's entire face. The Sutton Hoo helmet is now thought to have been buried around 620 to 625 AD. Its elaborate decoration led scholars to suggest it may have functioned less as battlefield armor and more as something resembling a crown, a material statement of authority as much as protection. The helmet has since become one of the most recognizable objects in British archaeology, described as iconic of the early Middle Ages and of English archaeology as a whole. The find was compared at the time to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, a comparison that gestures at the scale of surprise, even if the circumstances were very different. Among the other objects recovered was a purse lid, roughly 7.5 inches long, decorated with gold and garnet cloisonné work of exceptional skill. The ivory or bone backing had not survived, but the gold work remained, and it is considered one of the most technically accomplished pieces of metalwork from the entire early medieval period. Objects like the purse lid and the helmet did not suggest a culture scraping by at the edge of civilization. They suggested a court with access to skilled craftspeople, trade networks reaching into the Mediterranean, and accumulated wealth on a scale that demanded rethinking what Anglo-Saxon kingdoms actually looked like. The question that immediately followed the find was, whose burial was this? No body was recovered. The acidic soil that had dissolved the ship's timbers had also dissolved any human remains. There was no inscription, no document, no name. What the burial contained was wealth, military equipment, and the material markers of high status. Enough to suggest a king, but not enough to name one definitively. The leading interpretation, which most archaeologists and historians still accept as the most plausible, connects the burial to Rædwald, king of East Anglia, who died around 624 AD. The dating of the grave goods, the location within his kingdom, and the extraordinary scale of the burial all fit. But fit is not proof, and scholars are careful to say so. The identity of the person buried in Mound 1 remains an interpretation, not a confirmed fact. Rædwald himself is a figure who appears in the historical record only in fragments. He was, by some accounts, a king who held authority over other Anglo-Saxon rulers, the kind of over-king whose influence extended beyond his own territory. He also appears to have occupied an uncertain religious position, reportedly maintaining altars to both the old Germanic gods and the Christian gods simultaneously. If the burial in Mound 1 is his, it reflects that ambiguity. The grave goods include objects that may carry Christian symbolism alongside others that fit older Germanic traditions. The burial offers no resolution to that tension. It simply contains both. The absence of a body also forced a secondary question. Was this even a burial in the conventional sense? Some scholars have proposed that Mound 1 may represent a cenotaph, a monument to someone whose body was buried or lost elsewhere. The evidence cannot rule that out. What the evidence can say is that whoever this chamber was prepared for, the people who built it were making a claim about power and memory that they expected to last. Edith Pretty's decision about what to do with the find added another dimension to the story. The treasure trove inquest of 1939 concluded that the objects were not hidden with the intent to recover them. They were a burial, not concealed wealth, and therefore legal ownership rested with Pretty herself. She donated the entire collection to the nation. The objects went to the British Museum, where much of the collection remains on public display. The donation was described at the time as the largest single gift to the nation in the museum's history. What Sutton Hoo ultimately changed was not a single date or a single king. It changed the baseline assumption about what early medieval English society was capable of producing and sustaining. Before 1939, the scarcity of written records from the 5th through 7th centuries made it easy to assume that the period was one of cultural and political fragmentation. People surviving in the ruins of Rome, not building something new. Sutton Hoo demonstrated that at least one kingdom in this period had the organizational capacity to commission and bury treasure on a scale that rivals anything contemporary in Europe. The site continues to be studied. Archaeologists have excavated the area since the initial discovery, and the two cemeteries contain mounds that have not yet been fully investigated. New analytical techniques allow researchers to extract information from the soil itself, the traces left by decomposed organic material, the chemical signatures of objects that no longer exist in physical form. The site illuminates, as the archaeological record puts it, a culture during a period that lacks historical documentation. That illumination is still incomplete. The helmet stares out from museum display cases with a face that belonged to no one and everyone. a mask built to project authority, recovered from a ship buried in a field, identified only by the quality of what surrounded it. The name of the person it was made for may never be confirmed, but the kingdom that produced it, and the craftspeople who built it, and the mourners who chose to bury it with such deliberate care, those people are no longer invisible. The Dark Ages got a little lighter. Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.